The blood moon hung like a wound in the sky, casting Richmond Park in shades of crimson and shadow. Alpha Thomas Gendron pressed his forehead against the cool glass of his penthouse window, watching its ominous glow with a heart that had forgotten how to beat properly. 6 years. 6 years since Elena died, bringing their daughter into this world, and still the moon mocked him with its return. Below in the park, a small figure sat alone on the swings, her golden hair catching the eerie light. Michelle. His precious, broken little girl who should have been sleeping but instead wept where she thought no one could see her. Thomas closed his eyes, but the sight burned behind his lids. Tonight marked more than just another anniversary of loss. It marked the beginning of something the pack elders whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. The prophecy. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the key to either salvation or damnation waited. Please stop crying. Janet Pace looked up through her tears to find a child standing before her, 6 years old, maybe 7, with hair like spun gold and eyes that held far too much sadness for someone so young. I'm sorry, sweetheart, Janet managed, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I didn't know anyone was here. The child stepped closer, her small hands clasped in front of her white nightgown. Daddy says tears are just love with nowhere to go. Are you full of love with nowhere to go too? The question hit Janet like a physical blow. She'd been sitting on this bench for hours, staring at the dark waters of the pond and wondering if anyone would even notice if she just disappeared. 3 months since she'd lost her job. 2 months since the eviction. 1 month since she'd been living in her car until even that had been repossessed. What's your name? Janet asked instead of answering. Michelle. What's yours? Janet. She studied the little girl more carefully. What are you doing out here so late? Where are your parents? Michelle's lower lip trembled. Daddy's at home being sad. He gets really sad on nights like this when the moon is red. And Mommy. Her voice broke. Mommy's in heaven. Janet's heart clenched. Oh, honey. I'm so sorry. It's okay. She's been gone a long time. Michelle climbed onto the bench beside Janet, her bare feet swinging. But Daddy is so lonely. He pretends he's not, but I can feel it. It makes my chest hurt. There was something strange about this child, Janet realized. Something that made her want to pull Michelle close and never let go. It was as if a missing piece of herself had suddenly appeared. Where do you live? Janet asked gently. I should take you home. Michelle pointed toward the row of expensive buildings that bordered the park. The tall one with all the lights. But I don't want to go back yet. Daddy will just stand at the window being sad, and I'll have to pretend I'm sleeping. He'll be worried about you. No, he knows where I am. He always knows. Michelle turned those impossibly wise eyes on her. Will you tell me why you were crying? Maybe it will help. Janet found herself speaking before she could stop herself. The words poured out, about losing everything, about having nowhere to go, about feeling like the world had forgotten she existed. Michelle listened with the gravity of someone much older, nodding at all the right moments. My daddy could help, Michelle said when Janet finished. He helps people. That's what alphas do. Alpha? It's like being in charge. But in a good way. Michelle slipped her small hand into Janet's larger one, and the moment their skin touched, something extraordinary happened. The world exploded into light and color. Janet saw flashes of images she didn't understand, wolves running under starlight, a woman with silver eyes reaching out to her, a full moon blessing 2 figures standing beneath an ancient tree. She heard a voice, warm and melodic, speaking words that seemed to echo from the depths of her soul. The child needs you. They both do. Janet gasped and pulled her hand away, but Michelle held on tight. You felt it too, the little girl whispered, her eyes bright with tears and something like hope. You're the one. You're going to be my mommy. Michelle, Michelle. The voice that cut through the night air was deep, commanding, and edged with panic. Janet looked up to see a man striding toward them across the park, and her breath caught in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a fluid grace that reminded her of a predator. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and even in the strange light of the blood moon, she could see the sharp planes of his face, the strong line of his jaw. But it was his eyes that made her heart stutter, golden eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, fixed on his daughter with a mixture of relief and terror. "Daddy." Michelle jumped down from the bench and ran to him, throwing her arms around his legs. "I found her. I found Janet." The man's gaze shifted to Janet, and she felt pinned in place like a butterfly on a board. Something flickered in those golden depths, surprise, recognition, and something darker that made her shiver. "Michelle, what have I told you about leaving the building at night?" His voice was gentler now, but Janet could hear the underlying steel. "I'm sorry, Daddy, but I had to. She needed me." Michelle looked back at Janet with such certainty that it made Janet's chest tight. "And we need her." The man straightened slowly, never taking his eyes off Janet. "I'm Thomas Gendron. I apologize for my daughter disturbing you." "She didn't disturb me," Janet managed, getting to her feet on unsteady legs. She was actually a comfort." Something shifted in Thomas's expression. He inhaled deeply, and Janet could have sworn she saw his nostrils flare like an animal scenting the air. "You're hurt," he said suddenly. "Not physically, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head as if clearing it. "I'm sorry. That was presumptuous." "No, you're right." Janet wrapped her arms around herself. "It's been a difficult time." Michelle tugged on her father's hand. "Daddy, Janet doesn't have anywhere to go. Can she come home with us? Please?" "Michelle. Please, Daddy. Look at her. Really look." Thomas did look, and Janet felt that strange sensation again, as if he could see straight through to her soul. His jaw tightened, and she caught a flash of something almost desperate in his eyes. "That's very kind of you to offer," Janet said quickly, "but I couldn't impose." "It wouldn't be an imposition." Thomas's voice was rough. "Michelle has never, she doesn't usually take to strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Michelle said with absolute conviction. "She's family. I can feel it." Thomas knelt down to his daughter's level. "Sweetheart, what you're feeling might just be—" "It's not just feelings, Daddy. Show her your eyes." "Michelle, no. She needs to see. She needs to understand." Michelle looked at Janet with an intensity that was almost frightening. "There are things in this world that most people don't know about. Important things. And you're part of them whether you know it or not." Janet took a step back. "I think I should go." "Wait." Thomas stood, one hand still on his daughter's shoulder. "Janet, was it? I know this is going to sound strange, but do you have any family? Anyone who might have told you stories about your bloodline? My grandmother used to tell me old tales, but she died when I was 12. "Why?" Thomas and Michelle exchanged a look that made Janet's skin prickle with unease. "What kind of tales?" Thomas asked carefully. "Fairy stories, mostly. About wolves and magic and something about our family being special." Janet laughed shakily. She was a bit eccentric toward the end. Thomas went very still. "What did she say about wolves?" The question sent a chill down Janet's spine because suddenly she could hear her grandmother's voice as clearly as if the old woman were standing beside her. "Beware the wolves, child, for our bloodline carries both their salvation and their doom." "Janet?" Thomas's voice seemed to come from very far away. She looked at him, and this time she was certain. His eyes were glowing in the darkness like twin golden flames. "My daddy is so lonely," Michelle said suddenly, her small voice carrying across the park like a prayer. "Can you be my mommy at his birthday party?" The innocent words echoed through the darkness, and as they faded, a bolt of lightning split the sky above them. It struck the ancient oak tree they stood beside, cleaving it perfectly in half with a crack like the world breaking. Janet collapsed to her knees as visions flooded her mind, her grandmother's dying face, wolves running through silver light, and a voice that might have been the moon itself whispering. The time has come, daughter of the silver blood. Choose wisely, for all depends on what you do next. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Thomas reaching for her with hands that flickered between human and something altogether more dangerous, while Michelle stood watching with eyes that held the wisdom of ages and whispered, "She's the one, Daddy. She's finally home." Chapter 2. Janet woke to silk sheets and the scent of jasmine, her body aching as if she'd been struck by lightning, which, she supposed, she had been. The room around her was elegant beyond anything she'd ever experienced, all warm woods and soft fabrics, with morning light streaming through tall windows that overlooked Richmond Park. "You're awake." Thomas's deep voice drew her attention to the chair beside the bed where he sat, still wearing yesterday's clothes, dark circles under those impossibly golden eyes. "How long was I unconscious?" 18 hours. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Janet, what you experienced last night, the visions, the lightning, Michelle's reaction to you, we need to talk." She sat up slowly, acutely aware that she was wearing an unfamiliar silk nightgown. "Who changed my clothes?" "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She's discreet about unusual circumstances." Thomas stood and began pacing, a restless energy radiating from him that made her think of a caged wolf. "Janet, I'm going to tell you things that will sound impossible. But after what you experienced last night, I hope you'll at least listen." "Where's Michelle?" "Sleeping. She had a difficult night after you collapsed." His jaw tightened. "She kept asking for you. Wouldn't let anyone else comfort her." Something twisted in Janet's chest at the thought of that precious little girl in distress. "I want to see her. Soon. But first, you need to understand what's happening here." Thomas stopped pacing and fixed her with that intense stare. "My family isn't entirely human, Janet. We're werewolves. Shapeshifters. And Michelle, she's caught between two worlds, unable to complete her first transformation." Janet stared at him for a long moment. 6 months ago, she would have laughed or called for help. But after last night, after the visions, after feeling something ancient and powerful stir within her blood, she found herself nodding. "The stories my grandmother told me," she said quietly. "About wolves and magic bloodlines. They weren't just fairy tales, were they?" "No. They weren't." Thomas sat back down, relief flickering across his features. "Your grandmother was likely trying to prepare you, to warn you about who you really are." "And who am I?" "We're still figuring that out. But Janet, when I saw you last night, when I caught your scent." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "My wolf recognized you. Knew you. You carry the bloodline of the silver wolves, a lineage we thought had died out centuries ago." Before Janet could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. A woman in her 50s entered, carrying a breakfast tray. She had kind eyes and moved with quiet efficiency. "Mrs. Chen," Thomas said, "this is Janet." "Janet, my housekeeper." "Miss Janet." Mrs. Chen set the tray on the bedside table with a warm smile. "Little Michelle has been asking for you every few minutes. The child is quite taken with you." "How is she?" Janet asked. Mrs. Chen's expression grew troubled. "She had another episode in the night. Mr. Thomas had to call Dr. Reeves." Thomas's hands clenched into fists. "She's getting worse. The failure to shift is putting tremendous strain on her body." After Mrs. Chen left, Janet picked at the breakfast, her mind racing. "Thomas, what happens if she can't shift?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She'll die. On her 7th birthday, if she hasn't completed her first transformation, her body will tear itself apart trying." "When is her 7th birthday?" 3 weeks. Janet set down her teacup with shaking hands. "There has to be something we can do." "There might be." Thomas stood again, that restless energy back in full force. But it would require you to stay. To become part of our world permanently. And Janet, that would put you in terrible danger. Before she could ask what he meant, a scream echoed through the house, high, anguished, and undeniably Michelle's. Thomas was moving before the sound faded, and Janet found herself right behind him, bare feet flying over polished hardwood floors. They burst into Michelle's room to find the little girl writhing on her bed, her small body contorting in ways that made Janet's heart stop. Her face was elongated slightly, teeth too sharp, and her fingernails had become claws that ripped at the sheets. Michelle. Thomas rushed to her side, but the moment he touched her, she screamed louder. Don't. Janet pushed past him, instinct driving her forward. She gathered the convulsing child into her arms, and immediately Michelle's screams quieted to whimpers. Make it stop, Michelle sobbed against Janet's shoulder. Make the monster inside stop hurting me. Janet held her tighter, and as she did, she felt something warm and silvery flow from her into the child. Michelle's features gradually returned to normal, her breathing evening out. How? Thomas stared at them both. How did you do that? I don't know, Janet admitted, though she felt strangely drained. I just wanted to help her. Dr. Reeves arrived 20 minutes later, a distinguished man in his 60s who examined Michelle with the air of someone accustomed to unusual patience. After pronouncing her stable, he pulled Thomas aside for a hushed conversation that Janet caught fragments of, unprecedented control over the transformation. But at what cost to herself? That afternoon, Thomas showed Janet through his home, and she began to understand the scope of the world she'd stumbled into. The penthouse was enormous, taking up the entire top floor of the building, and everywhere she looked were subtle signs of his true nature. Paintings of wolves running under moonlight. Books on lycanthropy and ancient bloodlines. Security systems that were clearly designed to keep out more than human intruders. It's beautiful, she said as they stood in his library, walls lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. Isabella loved this room. The name slipped out before he seemed to catch himself. Your wife? Thomas's expression shuddered. Michelle's mother. She died giving birth. Thomas, I'm so sorry. It's been 6 years. I should have moved on by now. He pulled a book from the shelf, something about pack genealogies, and flipped through it without really seeing the pages. But when you're an alpha, when you found your true mate, losing them is like losing half your soul. There was pain in his voice so raw it made Janet's chest ache. She found herself stepping closer, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. Maybe she wouldn't want you to stay lost forever, she said softly. Thomas went very still. When he looked at her, his golden eyes held a hunger that made her breath catch. Janet. Her name was barely a whisper on his lips. You have no idea what you're doing to me. What am I doing? Making me feel things I swore I'd never feel again. He set the book aside and turned to face her fully. Making me want things I have no right to want. The air between them crackled with tension. Janet could feel her pulse racing, her skin warm where his gaze touched her. Maybe you do have the right, she heard herself say. Thomas closed his eyes as if in pain. No. I can't. Janet, if I let myself feel this, if I let myself love you, it could destroy you. What do you mean? Isabella died because her bloodline wasn't strong enough to bear an alpha's child. If I claim you as my mate, if we... He shook his head violently. I cannot love you, for love is death in my world. But even as he spoke, he was moving closer, his control clearly fracturing. His hands came up to cup her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with agonizing gentleness. Thomas, she whispered. I should send you away. Right now, before it's too late. Too late for what? For me to let you go. Their lips met in a kiss that was part desperation, part reverence, and entirely electric. Janet felt that silver warmth in her blood flare to life, responding to his touch with an intensity that frightened her. Thomas groaned against her mouth, his arms pulling her closer. A scream shattered the moment. Michelle. They broke apart and ran, finding the little girl in the hallway, collapsed and convulsing again. But this time was worse. Her partial shift was more pronounced, more violent. Her spine arched impossibly, and Janet could hear bones cracking. "She's dying," Thomas said, his voice breaking as he knelt beside his daughter. "The stress of the interrupted transformation, it's killing her." Janet didn't hesitate. She gathered Michelle into her arms again, pouring more of that silver energy into the child. This time, though, the drain was enormous. She felt years of her life flowing away, her vision graying at the edges. "Janet, stop." Thomas caught her as she swayed. "You're killing yourself." "I won't let her die," Janet managed. "And I won't let you die for her." His eyes were wild with fear, not for his daughter, but for her. "There has to be another way." That evening, Thomas called a meeting of the pack elders, 3 ancient werewolves who looked at Janet with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. "This human cannot remain," declared Elder Morrison, a stern woman with silver hair. "Pack law is clear. No humans are permitted near the Alpha bloodline." "She's not entirely human," Thomas argued. "She carries the silver bloodline." "Unproven," snapped Elder Blackwood. "And even if true, she's untrained, unawakened. She's a danger to us all. She's the only one who can help Michelle." "Then perhaps," said Elder Morrison coldly, "it's time to accept that Michelle's death is the moon goddess's will. And time for you to take a proper werewolf mate who can give you healthy heirs." The sound that came from Thomas's throat was pure animal rage. "Get out. All of you. Get out before I forget you're under my protection." After they left, Thomas sank into his chair, looking older than his years. "They're not entirely wrong," he said quietly. "About the danger. Janet, there are things about this world you don't understand yet. Our enemies. The shadow wolves who've been hunting the silver bloodline for generations. Tell me." He looked at her for a long moment, then stood. "Come with me. There's something I need to show you." He led her down a staircase she hadn't noticed before, into the basement of the building. What she found there took her breath away. The space was part shrine, part armory. Ancient weapons lined the walls, silver blades, crossbows, artifacts that hummed with power. But it was the altar in the center that made her heart stop. It was covered with photographs of a woman so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her. Isabella had dark hair and laughing eyes, and in every picture she was looking at Thomas with such love it made Janet's chest tight with unexpected jealousy. "She was magnificent," Thomas said softly, following her gaze. "Strong, brave, perfect in every way. And I killed her by loving her." Janet noticed something else among the photographs, a leather-bound journal tied with a faded ribbon. "Her diary," Thomas said when he saw her looking. I couldn't bring myself to read it." Janet picked up the journal, her fingers tingling where they touched the leather. "May I?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak. The first few entries were normal, a young woman's thoughts about falling in love, about mating with an alpha, about the joy of discovering she was pregnant. But as Janet read further, her blood grew cold. "The healers are worried," one entry read. "They say my bloodline isn't strong enough, that bearing an alpha's child requires ancient power I don't possess. Thomas doesn't know. I cannot tell him. I will not let him blame himself if I don't survive." And later, "The pain is getting worse. Every day, the child draws more from me. I feel my life force draining away, feeding his strength. But perhaps there's hope. I've been researching the silver bloodline, the legendary wolves who could bridge human and supernatural worlds. If such a bloodline still exists, if their power could someday protect future mothers, then my death might have meaning." The final entry was barely legible. "I'm dying. I can feel it. But I'm not afraid. Someday, Thomas will find love again. And when he does, I pray she'll have the power I lacked. I pray she'll be able to save our children where I could not." Janet's hands shook as she closed the journal. She knew. She knew she was going to die. What does it say? Thomas's voice was rough with pain. Janet told him, watching as understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by horror. Then Michelle, if she can't complete her transformation, if the stress kills her, it'll be exactly what happened to Isabella. The bloodline not strong enough to survive. A howl echoed from somewhere outside the building, long, mournful, and distinctly non-human. Thomas went rigid. Shadow wolves, he breathed. They've found us. The lights went out. In the darkness, Janet heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering far above them. Thomas grabbed her hand and pulled her toward what she hoped was an exit, but they didn't make it 10 feet before figures emerged from the shadows, men who moved wrong, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. Thomas Gendron. The voice was cultured, amused, and utterly cold. It's been far too long. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing a man in his 40s with platinum blonde hair and cruel features. Behind him stood 6 others, all radiating the same predatory menace. Damien. Thomas stepped protectively in front of Janet. What do you want? What I've always wanted. Justice for my sister's death. Damien Blackthorn's smile was all teeth. Isabella might have survived if you'd mated with someone from our pack instead of pursuing your obsession with true love. Isabella chose me. Just as I chose her. And look how that ended. Damien's red gaze shifted to Janet. And now here you are, making the same mistake. Though I must admit, I didn't expect you to find one of the silver bloodline. We thought we'd eliminated them all decades ago. Janet's blood turned to ice. You killed my grandmother. Did we? I honestly can't remember. We killed so many. His laugh was like broken glass. But don't worry, dear. You won't live long enough to properly mourn her. Over my dead body, Thomas snarled, and Janet felt the change beginning in him, his bones shifting, his muscles expanding. That can be arranged. Damien nodded to his followers. Kill the alpha. Bring me the witch and the child. The shadow wolves attacked as one, their forms blurring between human and animal. Thomas met them halfway, his own transformation complete now, a massive black wolf with golden eyes that glowed like fire. Janet ran for the stairs, driven by a single thought, Michelle. She had to get to Michelle. She found the little girl in Thomas's bedroom, standing at the window and staring down at the chaos in the park below. More shadow wolves surrounded the building, their red eyes like fallen stars in the darkness. Janet. Michelle threw herself into Janet's arms. They're here for me, aren't they? The bad wolves from my dreams. I won't let them take you, Janet promised, though she had no idea how she could possibly keep that promise. There's a way, Michelle said, her young face grave with knowledge beyond her years. Daddy told me about it once. The bloodline awakening ritual. But he said it was too dangerous. What is it? It would wake up your wolf. Make you like us. Then you could protect me properly. Michelle's eyes filled with tears. But Janet, it might kill you. And if it doesn't work, if you're not strong enough, I'll die anyway when they get up here. Michelle nodded sadly. Daddy has the ritual book in his study. But it has to be done under the full moon, and it has to be. She swallowed hard. It has to be done willingly, with love. Janet looked out the window at the blood moon hanging overhead, then back at the precious child in her arms. There really wasn't a choice at all. They found the ritual book exactly where Michelle said it would be, an ancient tome bound in silver and inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and move when Janet wasn't looking directly at them. The words inside were in multiple languages, but somehow Janet could read them all. The Awakening of the Silver Bloodline, the chapter heading read. To be performed only in dire need, for the ritual will either elevate the subject to their true power or destroy them entirely. The sounds of fighting were getting closer. Janet could hear Thomas's roars of rage, the snarls and howls of the shadow wolves, the crash of furniture being destroyed. We have to do it now, Michelle said urgently. Before they get here. Janet gathered the supplies the book called for, silver daggers, moonstone powder, candles that burned with silver flame. Michelle helped with the solemnity of someone far older than her years. They had just finished drawing the ritual circle on the floor when Thomas burst through the door, battered and bleeding but still fighting. Behind him came Damien and 2 of his followers. The ritual circle, Damien breathed, his eyes widening with something like fear. "You little fool, do you have any idea what you're playing with?" "Stay back," Janet warned, stepping into the center of the circle with Michelle behind her. "Janet, no." Thomas started toward her, but Damien's wolves blocked his path. "The ritual could kill you. And staying human definitely will." Janet picked up one of the silver daggers, its blade singing as it touched her skin. "Michelle, are you ready?" The little girl nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Janet. Whatever happens, I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." Janet began to speak the ancient words, feeling power rise around them like a silver storm. The moonlight streaming through the windows grew brighter, more focused, until it formed a pillar of pure radiance around the ritual circle. "Stop this." Damien lunged forward, but the silver light repelled him like a physical force. "You don't know what you're awakening." The ritual reached its crescendo. Janet raised the silver dagger and drew it across her palm, letting her blood fall onto the moonstone powder. It flared like captured starlight, and suddenly Janet felt something ancient and powerful unfurling within her blood. But it wasn't the wolf she'd expected. Silver light erupted from her body, so bright it turned night to day. She felt her consciousness expanding, touching something vast and cosmic and utterly alien to anything human or werewolf. Power flooded through her, not the earthbound strength of the wolves, but something that belonged to the spaces between stars. "No," Damien whispered, his face pale with terror. "It can't be. The silver witches died out centuries ago. What's happening to me?" Janet gasped, looking down at her hands as silver fire danced across her skin. "You're not becoming a werewolf," Thomas said, wonder and fear warring in his voice. "You're something else entirely. Something older. The silver witch rises." Damien's voice cracked with panic. "Tonight, the bloodline ends forever." He raised his hands and Janet saw shadows gathering around him like living things. But before he could strike, the French doors to the balcony exploded inward. More shadow wolves poured through, 12, 2, more than Janet could count. "You cannot run from destiny, little witch," Damien snarled. "Your grandmother tried to hide from us. Your mother tried to deny what she was. But you've just painted a target on everyone you care about." The silver light around Janet pulsed brighter, and she felt Michelle stagger behind her. The child's connection to her was drawing too much power, more than her small body could handle. "Michelle?" Janet spun around to find the little girl collapsed on the floor, her skin pale as moonlight, her breathing shallow. "Janet." Michelle's voice was barely a whisper. I can't hold on." "No." Janet knelt beside her, pouring silver energy into the child, but instead of helping, it seemed to be draining Michelle faster. "She's dying," Thomas said, his voice breaking as he knelt beside them. "The ritual, it's killing her." Janet looked up at the army of shadow wolves surrounding them, at Damien's triumphant smile, at Michelle's fading life force. The silver power inside her roared with potential, but she had no idea how to control it, how to save the people she loved without destroying them. And as Michelle's eyes fluttered closed and her small body went still in Janet's arms, Janet threw back her head and screamed, a sound of anguish that shattered every window in the building and sent silver lightning crackling across the sky. The bloodline had awakened at last. But it might already be too late. Chapter 3. Time seemed suspended in that moment of anguish. Janet's scream of grief had shattered more than just windows, it had torn a hole in reality itself. Silver light poured from the cracks in the air around her, and the shadow wolves cowered back as something ancient and terrible stirred in the space between worlds. "Michelle," Janet sobbed, clutching the little girl's lifeless body. "Please, baby, come back to me." Thomas tried to reach them, but the silver energy radiating from Janet formed a barrier that burned his skin when he touched it. "Janet, you have to stop. The power is consuming you." But Janet barely heard him. The cosmic force flowing through her veins was showing her truths that made her soul weep. She could see the threads of fate stretching back through centuries, see the pattern that had led to this moment, and she finally understood what she truly was. "A lunar guardian," she whispered, the words tasting like starlight and sorrow on her tongue. "Not a werewolf at all, but something far older. Something that was never meant to walk among mortals." Damien's triumphant laughter died on his lips. "Impossible. The lunar guardians are extinct. We made sure of that." "You made sure of nothing," said a new voice from the shattered doorway, cultured, feminine, and coldly amused. Janet looked up through her tears to see a woman striding into the room as if she owned it. She was strikingly beautiful, with silver-streaked auburn hair and violet eyes that held the weight of centuries. Her presence made the very air hum with power. "Beatrice," Thomas breathed, and Janet heard a mixture of love, hate, and terror in his voice. "Hello, darling," the woman said, her gaze fixed on Thomas with something like pity. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever?" "You're supposed to be dead," Thomas snarled, his wolf form rippling just beneath his human skin. "Death is such a limiting concept." Beatrice stepped delicately over the bodies of fallen shadow wolves, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. Especially when one has duties that transcend mortal existence. Janet struggled to her feet, Michelle's body still cradled in her arms, silver power crackling around them both. "Who are you?" Beatrice smiled, and in that expression Janet saw both infinite love and bottomless cruelty. "I'm many things, child. Thomas's former wife. The high priestess of the Obsidian Circle. The woman who orchestrated every moment of your life to bring you to this precise instant." Her violet eyes softened with something that might have been maternal affection. "And, most importantly, I'm your mother." The words hit Janet like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My mother died when I was 3. Your adoptive mother died. The woman who raised you after I gave you away to keep you safe from the very people now hunting you." Beatrice gestured elegantly at the carnage around them. "Though I see my efforts were ultimately futile." "You're lying," Thomas growled, but Janet could see the doubt creeping into his golden eyes. "Am I? Tell me, Thomas, did you never wonder why your precious Isabella was so eager to mate with you? Why she got pregnant so quickly? Why she was so insistent that the child be named Michelle?" Beatrice's smile turned knife-sharp. "Isabella was my acolyte, darling. Everything she did was according to my design." The betrayal hit Thomas like a sledgehammer. Janet watched him stagger backward, his face draining of color. "No. Isabella loved me. She chose me. Isabella loved the idea of power. And you, my dear Alpha, were simply the strongest bloodline available." Beatrice knelt beside a fallen shadow wolf and touched his forehead. The creature's eyes fluttered open, red irises now violet. "She seduced you, mated with you, and bore your child because I ordered her to. Michelle was never meant to be a normal werewolf, Thomas. She was bred to be a vessel." "A vessel for what?" Janet demanded, though part of her already knew the answer. "For the reincarnated soul of the first lunar guardian. The being of pure moon magic who ruled the supernatural world 10,000 years ago before she was betrayed and murdered by those she sought to protect." Beatrice stood gracefully, the converted shadow wolf rising to stand at her heel. "Michelle's human death was necessary to complete the resurrection. And your transformation, my dear daughter, will provide the power needed to anchor that ancient soul in a mortal form." Janet felt the silver energy inside her pulse with recognition and horror. "You're saying Michelle is the reborn goddess?" "Yes. Though she'll need time to fully integrate her memories and powers." Beatrice looked at the child's still form with something like reverence. "In the meantime, your role is to serve as her guardian, to protect her while she remembers who she truly is." "And if I refuse?" "Then the supernatural world tears itself apart in a war that will spill over into the human realm and destroy both." Beatrice's expression grew grave. The old treaties are breaking down, Janet. Vampires are hunting werewolves in the open. Fae courts are raiding human cities. The only thing that can restore balance is the return of the Lunar Guardian's absolute authority. She's lying, Damien spoke for the first time since Beatrice's arrival, his earlier confidence replaced by desperation. The Shadow Wolves exist to prevent exactly this. We've seen what happens when the Lunar Guardians rule: chaos, death, the enslavement of every supernatural being under their power. The previous Guardians were flawed, Beatrice admitted. Driven mad by the isolation of immortal power. But Janet is different. She has love to anchor her humanity. Love? Janet laughed bitterly, looking down at Michelle's pale face. I just watched the child I was meant to protect die in my arms. Where's the love in that? She's not dead, daughter. She's transforming, just as you are. Beatrice approached slowly, her hands raised peacefully. But if you don't complete your own transformation soon, if you don't accept your role as Lunar Guardian, then yes, she will remain lost between life and death forever. The sound that came from Thomas's throat was pure anguish. Janet, please. Don't listen to her. There has to be another way. There isn't. The new voice belonged to a man Janet hadn't noticed before, tall, broad-shouldered, with prematurely silver hair and scars crisscrossing his arms. He leaned heavily against the doorframe, blood seeping from wounds that should have been fatal. Marcus? Thomas spun toward his beta, hope and horror warring in his expression. You should be healing. The pack bonds. The pack bonds are broken, Thomas. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Half our people are dead. The other half are scattered to the winds. And I... He coughed, blood speckling his lips. I'm dying. No. Thomas started toward him, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. There's something I need to tell you first. Something I should have told you 6 years ago. Marcus's gaze found Janet, and she saw desperate apology in his eyes. Isabella wasn't your true mate, Thomas. She was mine. The confession hung in the air like a physical weight. Thomas went completely still, his breathing shallow. The mating bond, the overwhelming attraction, the perfect compatibility, it was all for me. But Beatrice's cult needed Isabella to bear an alpha's child, not a beta's. So Marcus's voice broke. I let you believe she was yours. I let you love her while she belonged to me. You're lying. But Thomas's protest was weak, and Janet could see the pieces falling into place in his mind. The night she died giving birth to Michelle, she called my name. Not yours. Mine. Marcus slid down the wall, his strength finally failing. I've been living with that guilt ever since. Letting you mourn a love that was never real while I grieved the mate I never claimed. Marcus. Take care of them, Marcus whispered, his eyes already glazing over. The guardian and the child. There are only hope now. He died with a soft exhale, and Janet felt something fundamental shift in the supernatural fabric around them. The pack bonds Thomas had spoken of, the ties that connected Alpha to followers, snapped like broken strings. Now do you see? Beatrice's voice was gentle but implacable. Everything you believed was a lie designed to bring us to this moment. Your marriage, your daughter's parentage, your pack's loyalty, all of it orchestrated by forces beyond your comprehension. Thomas fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of revelation and loss. Then none of it was real. None of it mattered. It mattered to you, Janet said softly, her heart breaking for him even as her own world crumbled around her. The love you felt was real, even if its foundation was false. As is the love you feel for Michelle, Beatrice added. And that love is what will save you both from the madness that claimed previous guardians. You're not just transforming into a being of power, Janet. You're transforming into a being of love. Janet looked down at Michelle's still form, then up at Thomas's devastated face. The silver energy inside her was growing stronger by the moment, and with it came visions of what she could become, immortal, powerful, able to command every supernatural creature with a thought. But also alone, separated from the mortal world forever, watching the people she loved age and die while she remained unchanged. "What happens to Thomas if I do this?" she asked. "He lives," Beatrice said simply. "He finds a new pack, perhaps even finds love again someday. He remains mortal, remains connected to the world he knows." "And Michelle?" "Becomes what she was always meant to be. The ruler of our kind, the bridge between human and supernatural realms." Beatrice's expression grew sad. "But she won't be the child you knew. That innocent little girl will be gone forever, replaced by a consciousness older than human civilization." Janet felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at Thomas. "I can't lose you. Not when I've just found you." "And I can't lose you to the moon's curse," Thomas said, rising to his feet with desperate determination. "Janet, please. I would rather watch the world burn than see you transformed into something I can't reach, can't touch, can't love." "My love," Janet whispered, memorizing every line of his face, every golden fleck in his eyes. "Some prices must be paid." She closed her eyes and stopped fighting the silver energy coursing through her veins. It rushed through her like a flood, rewriting her very essence, lifting her beyond the boundaries of mortal flesh. She felt her consciousness expanding, touching every supernatural mind for miles around, feeling their fear, their awe, their instinctive urge to kneel before her power. Thomas's howl of anguish echoed through the building as Janet's human form dissolved into pure moonlight, then reformed as something altogether more magnificent and terrible. Her hair now shone like liquid silver, her skin had a luminescent quality that made her seem carved from starlight, and her eyes. Her eyes held the cold beauty of the moon itself. "The transformation is complete," Beatrice breathed, and even she seemed awed by what Janet had become. "You are now the lunar guardian, mistress of all supernatural creatures, immortal and powerful beyond imagining." But with the power came a terrible cost. Janet could feel her human memories beginning to fade, becoming distant and unimportant compared to the cosmic knowledge flooding her mind. She looked at the man kneeling before her, dark-haired, handsome, weeping, and struggled to remember why his pain should matter to her. "Who are you, Wolf?" she heard herself ask, her voice now holding harmonics that made the air itself sing. "Why do you weep?" "Janet." The name escaped Thomas's lips like a prayer. "Please, remember me. Remember us." But the memories were slipping away like water through her fingers. Love, loss, mortality, such small things compared to the grand design of the universe that she could now see so clearly. A movement caught her attention. The child she'd been holding was stirring, silver light beginning to emanate from her small form. As Janet watched with detached interest, Michelle's eyes opened, but they weren't the bright, innocent eyes of a 6-year-old girl. They held the weight of eons, the cold calculation of a being who had watched civilizations rise and fall. "Sister," the child said in a voice that belonged to no mortal throat. "You have done well. The resurrection is complete." Michelle sat up gracefully, too gracefully for a child, and Janet realized with growing horror that the little girl she'd loved was gone. In her place sat the reborn consciousness of the first lunar guardian, ancient, powerful, and utterly alien to human feeling. "Where is the child?" Janet asked, some last vestige of her humanity asserting itself. "Where is Michelle?" "She served her purpose. Her soul has been absorbed into mine. She is part of me now, as all the vessels before her became part of me." The thing wearing Michelle's face smiled with terrible beauty. "Do not mourn her, sister. She was honored to contribute to our cause." "No." The word escaped Janet's lips as both whisper and command, and the building shook with the force of her denial. "Bring her back." "Impossible. The child is gone, her essence used to anchor my return to this realm." The ancient being studied Janet with eyes that held no warmth. "You grieve for a mortal, sister. Such attachments are beneath us now." But Janet found that she couldn't let go of her grief, couldn't release her love for the little girl who'd asked her to be her mommy. That love was an anchor, holding her to her humanity even as the cosmic power tried to wash it away. I remember, she said suddenly, fiercely. I remember a little girl who cried under the moon. I remember a man who loved his daughter more than life itself. I remember being human. Impossible, the ancient guardian said, her composure cracking slightly. The transformation erases such weaknesses. Love isn't weakness, Janet replied, and as she spoke, she felt some of her human memories solidifying, becoming permanent fixtures in her transformed mind. Love is strength. And I choose to remember. But even as she fought to retain her humanity, she could feel other memories fading, her grandmother's face, her childhood home, the taste of coffee in the morning. The cosmic consciousness was too vast, too overwhelming. She was becoming something other than human, other than mortal, and no amount of love could fully stop that transformation. Behind her, Thomas continued to weep for the woman who could no longer remember why his tears should matter. Before her, the creature wearing Michelle's face began to glow with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. The awakening is complete, Beatrice announced with satisfaction. The lunar guardians have returned to rule the supernatural world. Let the new age begin. But as Janet looked at the devastation around her, at Marcus's corpse, at Thomas's broken spirit, at the empty shell that had once been a precious little girl, she wondered if salvation and damnation were really so different after all. The moon hung overhead, crimson and patient, waiting to see what the reborn guardians would do with their terrible gift of power. And in the distance, more howls echoed through the night, shadow wolves, vampires, fae, and dozens of other supernatural creatures, all converging on the source of the cosmic disturbance that had just rewritten the rules of their world forever. Chapter 4. The transformed Janet stood in the ruins of Thomas's penthouse, silver light radiating from her luminescent form as she struggled to remember why the weeping man before her mattered. The cosmic consciousness filling her mind whispered that mortal emotions were weakness, that love was a chain binding her to an inferior existence. But something deep within her, some stubborn core of humanity, refused to let go. Janet, Thomas whispered again, reaching toward her with trembling fingers. Please, remember us. Remember what we shared. The being that had been Michelle laughed, a sound like crystal bells breaking. She cannot hear you, mortal. The transformation has elevated her beyond such petty concerns. She's still in there, Thomas said fiercely, his golden eyes never leaving Janet's face. I can see her fighting. He was right. Janet could feel two distinct consciousnesses warring within her transformed mind, the ancient guardian power that demanded cold perfection, and her human soul that clung desperately to love, to memory, to the precious moments that had made her who she was. You are weak, the original guardian said, rising from Michelle's small form with movements too fluid for a child. As were all who came before me. This is why the previous guardians fell to madness. They could not release their mortal attachments. Maybe that's not madness, Janet managed, her voice harmonizing strangely as two different essences spoke through her. Maybe that's wisdom. The original guardians borrowed features twisted with disdain. Sentiment. You will learn, as I learned 10 millennia ago, that love is the greatest weakness of all. It makes you vulnerable, exploitable, soft. It also makes me human, Janet replied, and as she spoke, she felt more of her memories solidifying, Thomas's kiss in the library, Michelle's laugh, the warmth of belonging to something greater than herself. Beatrice stepped forward, her violet eyes glittering with satisfaction. Both of you are behaving like children. The transformation is complete. The old order has returned. Now we must. Her words were cut off by a sound that made every supernatural being in the room freeze, a howl that spoke of challenge, of defiance, of an alpha who had lost everything and no longer cared about the consequences. Damien Blackthorne burst through the shattered windows, his red eyes wild with desperation. Behind him came more shadow wolves, but these weren't attacking. They were running. The eclipse, Damien gasped, blood streaming from wounds across his chest. The solar eclipse begins in minutes. Every barrier between realms is about to collapse. Beatrice's composed mask slipped. That's impossible. The calculations showed. Your calculations were wrong. Damien snarled. And now every supernatural creature for 1,000 miles is converging on this location. They can all feel the guardian power. They're coming to either worship it or destroy it. As if summoned by his words, the building shook as something massive struck its foundation. Through the broken windows, Janet could see shapes moving in the darkness, vampires flowing like living shadow, fey warriors mounted on creatures of starlight and storm, ancient beings that had slumbered for centuries now stirring to investigate the cosmic disturbance. "We need to leave," Beatrice said urgently. "Take the Guardians somewhere safe until—" "No." The word came from Janet and the original Guardian simultaneously, their voices creating a harmony that made reality ripple around them. "This ends here. Tonight. No more running, no more manipulation, no more lies." Thomas stepped forward, his face set with grim determination. "She's right. I'm done being a pawn in your games, Beatrice. Done letting you dictate the fate of everyone I love." "You foolish man," Beatrice snapped. "You have no idea what forces you're challenging. The Guardian's power is mine," Janet interrupted, silver energy crackling around her as she finally accepted what she had become while simultaneously refusing to surrender what she had been. "And I choose how to use it." The original Guardian laughed, but there was uncertainty in the sound now. "You think you can control cosmic forces with mortal sentiment? You will burn yourself out trying." "Maybe," Janet said. "But I'd rather burn out as myself than live forever as someone else." The building shook again, more violently this time. Through the darkness outside, Janet could see the first edge of the moon beginning to cross the sun's path. The solar eclipse was beginning, and with it, the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms would dissolve entirely. "They're coming for us," Thomas said grimly, moving to stand beside Janet despite the silver energy that burned his skin. "Every supernatural faction that wants to control Guardian power." "Let them come," Janet replied, feeling her human love and Guardian strength beginning to merge into something entirely new. "I'm tired of being afraid." The first wave hit moments later. Vampires swarmed up the sides of the building like living darkness while fey warriors materialized through portals of rainbow light. Ancient dragons circled overhead, their roars shaking the very air, and from the shadows came creatures Janet had no names for, beings of pure nightmare and legend. But they weren't the only ones answering the call. Through the chaos came the surviving members of Thomas's pack, fewer than a dozen werewolves, battered and bloody but still loyal to their alpha. Behind them ran other creatures Janet hadn't expected, young vampires fleeing their elders' hunger for power, fey who preferred freedom to ancient courts, supernatural beings of every description who were tired of being pawns in others' games. "Thomas." A familiar voice made Janet's heart clench. Dr. Reeves stood in the doorway, his medical bag in one hand and a silver-loaded crossbow in the other. "We came as soon as we felt the pack bonds break." "What do you need?" "Survivors," Thomas said grimly. "And maybe a miracle." The battle erupted on multiple levels simultaneously. While Thomas led the physical defense against the creatures pouring through every entrance, Janet found herself pulled into a different kind of combat, a war fought in the spaces between reality, where thoughts became weapons and emotions shaped the battlefield itself. The original Guardian faced her across a landscape of pure silver light, her borrowed form now revealed in its true aspect, a being of such ancient power that looking directly at her was like staring into the heart of a dying star. "You cannot win," the original Guardian said, her voice echoing across dimensions. "I am 10,000 years of accumulated power, wisdom, and experience. You are a mortal who has been Guardian for mere hours." "I'm also something you never were," Janet replied, drawing strength from every memory of love she'd ever experienced. "I'm someone who chooses to care about others more than myself." They clashed in a symphony of silver lightning and cosmic fire. Each spell they cast sent shockwaves through both realms, threatening to tear holes in reality itself. Janet fought with everything she had, but the original Guardian was right. She was vastly outmatched in terms of raw power and experience. In the physical realm, Thomas was losing ground as well. Even with his surviving pack and their unexpected allies, they were overwhelmed by the sheer number of creatures seeking to claim Guardian power for themselves. He watched Dr. Reeves fall to a vampire's claws, saw young pack members torn apart by beings older than human civilization. But what broke his heart was watching Michelle's small body standing in the center of the chaos, untouched by the violence around her while the original Guardian's consciousness fought Janet in the spiritual realm. The little girl he'd loved was gone, replaced by something that watched the carnage with cold, ancient eyes. "She's not coming back, is she?" he asked Beatrice during a brief lull in the fighting. Beatrice's composed mask had finally cracked, revealing genuine grief beneath. The child's soul was consumed to anchor the resurrection. "I hoped some trace would remain, but you sacrificed her anyway," Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. "Just like you sacrificed Isabella. Just like you're willing to sacrifice Janet." "For the greater good," Beatrice protested. "To prevent a war that would destroy both worlds." "No," Thomas said, understanding flooding through him with crystal clarity. "For your own vision of order. You never cared about peace, you cared about control." As if summoned by his realization, Damien Blackthorne appeared beside them, his red eyes blazing with desperate hope. "There might be another way," he said urgently. "The Shadow Wolves have legends, stories of a guardian who chose love over power and found a third path." "What kind of path?" Thomas demanded. "Separation," Damien said. "The power and the person divided, but both allowed to exist. But it requires..." He swallowed hard. "It requires the willing sacrifice of an alpha's life force to create the bridge between realms." Thomas didn't hesitate. "Do it." "Thomas, no." Beatrice grabbed his arm. "You don't understand, it won't just kill you. It will unmake you entirely. No afterlife, no spiritual realm, nothing. Complete obliteration." "I don't care," Thomas said simply. "Janet gave up her humanity to save Michelle. Now I'll give up my existence to save them both." In the spiritual realm, Janet was losing. The original Guardian's power was too vast, too refined by millennia of existence. With each exchange, Janet felt more of her human memories being burned away by cosmic fire. "Surrender," the original Guardian commanded. "Accept what you have become and stop this futile resistance." "Never," Janet gasped, but she could feel herself weakening. That's when she felt it, Thomas's life force, blazing like a beacon as he willingly poured his very existence into the space between realms. The connection they'd shared, the love that had awakened her guardian powers in the first place, became a bridge of pure intention. "What are you doing?" the original Guardian demanded, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Choosing love over destiny," Janet replied, and suddenly she could see it, the path Damien had spoken of. Not the all-or-nothing transformation that made Guardians into cosmic beings, but a synthesis. Human emotion guiding Guardian power. Love tempering ancient magic. She reached out through Thomas's sacrifice and found Michelle, not the original Guardian's consciousness, but the little girl's soul, preserved within the cosmic power like a pearl within an oyster. Janet pulled, drawing on every ounce of love she'd ever felt, and slowly, impossibly, began to separate the two consciousnesses that had been forced together. "No!" the original Guardian shrieked as Janet tore Michelle's soul free. "Without the child's anchor, I cannot maintain physical form." "Then find another way to exist," Janet said, her voice now purely her own as she reclaimed her humanity while keeping her guardian abilities. "But you don't get to steal a child's life to do it." The original Guardian's borrowed form began to dissolve, her consciousness scattering back to whatever realm it had originated from. But as she faded, Janet felt something unexpected, not hatred or rage, but gratitude. "Perhaps," the ancient being whispered as she vanished, "love is not weakness after all." In the physical realm, the change was immediate and dramatic. Michelle's body collapsed, but when Thomas, weakened but somehow still alive despite his sacrifice, gathered her into his arms, her eyes opened with their familiar warmth and innocence. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice purely that of a 6-year-old girl. "I had the strangest dream." "It's over, sweetheart," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face. "It's all over." The supernatural creatures surrounding them had frozen as well, all staring at Janet as she materialized back into the physical realm, but different now. She still glowed with guardian power, but it was warm silver instead of cold moonlight, and her eyes held both cosmic wisdom and human compassion. "I am the Lunar Guardian," she announced, her voice carrying to every being present. "But I choose to be Janet Pace as well. And I say this war ends now." The power in her words was absolute, but it was tempered by love, by choice, by the understanding that true strength came not from domination but from protection. One by one, the assembled creatures bowed, not in submission, but in recognition of something new being born. Beatrice was the last to kneel, her violet eyes bright with tears. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I thought I was saving the world, but I nearly destroyed it instead." "We all make mistakes," Janet said gently. "What matters is what we do next." What came next was a year of rebuilding, not just the physical damage from the battle, but the entire structure of supernatural society. Janet worked tirelessly to create new accords between species, always guided by the principle that love and choice should triumph over tradition and bloodline. Michelle, now 8, had retained some guardian abilities but used them to help other supernatural children learn to control their powers safely. She bridged the gap between human and supernatural worlds with the wisdom of someone who had briefly touched cosmic consciousness but chosen to return to childhood innocence. Thomas rebuilt his pack, but as something new, a family that included humans, werewolves, and other supernatural beings united not by blood but by choice and affection. The mating ceremony took place exactly 1 year after the eclipse, during the next blood moon. Representatives from every supernatural species attended, recognizing the union not just as a wedding but as the founding moment of a new age. As Janet walked down the moonlit aisle in a dress that seemed woven from starlight itself, she felt the growing life within her, twins, as the ancient prophecies had foretold, but not the weapons of destruction the old oracles had predicted. Instead, they would be children of love, bridges between worlds, symbols of what could be accomplished when power was guided by compassion. The ceremony itself was simple. Thomas spoke vows in the ancient language of his people, promising to love her through all transformations, all challenges, all lifetimes. Janet responded in words that came from both her human heart and her guardian soul, swearing to protect not just him but all who chose love over hatred, hope over despair. Michelle stood as both flower girl and officiant, her young voice carrying ancient authority as she pronounced them truly mated under the laws of both human and supernatural realms. The celebration lasted until dawn, with creatures that had been enemies for millennia dancing together under the stars, united by the joy of two people who had chosen love over destiny and changed the world in the process. 6 months later, Janet gave birth to twins, a daughter who would grow up entirely human but with an intuitive understanding of the supernatural world, and a son who carried guardian abilities but would never be forced to use them against his will. On their first anniversary, the family sat on their estate's terrace watching the sunrise after their first truly peaceful full moon in years. The grounds around them were home to both human and supernatural families who had found sanctuary in the new order they'd created. Thomas held their son while Janet cradled their daughter, both babies sleeping peacefully in the golden morning light. Michelle sat between her parents, using her guardian abilities to make fireflies dance in patterns that told stories of hope and healing. "You saved us all," Thomas whispered, pressing a kiss to Janet's temple. "No, my love," Janet replied, leaning into his warmth while watching their children sleep. "We saved each other." Michelle looked up from her fireflies, her young face bright with the wisdom of someone who had seen the darkness and chosen the light. "And we'll keep saving each other forever and ever." As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the camera of fate pulled back to reveal their estate surrounded by gardens where human and supernatural children played together, where former enemies had become friends, where love had indeed conquered darkness. In the distance, church bells and wolf howls rose in harmony, celebrating another dawn in a world where anything was possible, as long as it was built on love.